Hello and good evening. I'm Neil Maiden, Professor of Digital Creativity at the University of London, and a very happy UN-designated World Creativity and Innovation Day to you all, although it's coming to an end, sadly, just now. Over the next hour and 20 minutes, we're hoping to just pull together some interesting talks and themes as part of his symposium on ideas around AI and creativity. So over the first 45-50 minutes, you'll be exposed to 6-minute pitches come presentations that will cover a range of topics. I'll be talking about how we can use AI for creative purposes in business. Sara Jones will be talking about creativity and resilience, certainly for innovators and entrepreneurs. Eduardo Alonso will talk about can AI create art? And then on the flip side of that, Enrico Bonadio, a lawyer, will talk about whether artworks created by AI should be protected by copyright. And then last but not least, we'll have Máire Kerrin, who will be from the work psychology group, and she'll be talking about AI and corporate investment and the risks and opportunities therein. And after that, we'll move straight into a 30-minute presentation, roundtable, where you'll have a chance to talk with the presenters, ask questions. So in terms of how it will work, we have some housekeeping. We're going to ask you to post any questions, comments directly into the chat box, and our army of little elves in the background will be collating great questions to ask at the round table panel discussion. I may ask them on your behalf, or we may even give you a chance to ask them yourselves. You are muted for this event until we choose otherwise. Please note that the event is being recorded for publication by CebAI and the university. And if you wish to join in the wider social media banter around the mini symposium, then we are using the hashtag CebAI and WCID for the World Creativity and Innovation Day. So that's the sort of the broad structure of the event. I am going to go straight in here and start with the first session so that we leave ourselves enough time for talking. And I'm going to start talking about something called CebAI, which is a new approach for creative thinking on demand. And as I've said, I'm Neil Maiden. I'm Professor of Digital Creativity at City University of London, and I'm Director of this new entity called CebAI. So we're talking about something called CebAI. To be clear, we've had some issues with this. I'm referring to this pronunciation, CebAI, a bay where the sea comes in that you'll find on the coast. And I include Exhibit A here in terms of how it might be recognized and pronounced. I am not talking about CAI, or some people have maliciously suggested CIA. That is not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about CebAI, as in we're not sort of secret admirers of Belle and Sebastian, the 1990s pop band, so it's not AI. We're certainly not old-fashioned and sepia. And last but not least, we're definitely not talking about Serbia. There's nothing against Serbia, we're just not. We are CebAI. So what is CebAI? It's a new venture, a new centre that's been funded by Research England, one of the UK research or RIs, and it's about delivering to business and other kinds of organisation creativity and creative thinking on demand. Our aim ultimately is to enable people in organisations, individuals, groups to undertake effective creative thinking every day without some of the constraints that currently exist on that in terms of skills, finding facilitators, having space. And we particularly aim to do that by exploiting existing business information assets such as reports, marketing analyses, databases that you might have within your organizations, which are rarely used for creative purposes. And the primary vehicle we intend to use to do that is to develop a set of on-demand creativity services that any individual employee or team could use over the internet as software as a service. And these services are going to combine automated algorithms that can look at your business assets and compute creative outcomes based on the content of those reports, and feed those outcomes to interactive web applications and maybe phone applications that can present the ideas in a way that will augment the individual human creativity. So it's a combination of automation and interactive support that is about improving and enhancing our ability to think creatively. And underpinning all of this is an attempt for us to synthesize creativity knowledge, the very vast body of knowledge that exists about creativity and creative thinking at multiple levels, at teams, at social level and individually, with these business information assets that many organizations have. And as I've said, they use very frequently for creative purposes. Not only do we intend to be quite ambitious, we intend to do this across business sectors. So I talked about creativity knowledge, and I'm often struck by how much creativity knowledge, i.e. knowledge about creativity, how to undertake it, how to guide others to it exists. There are many of these kinds of handbooks that exist. There is more heavyweight theoretical research, such as the Csikszentmihalyi books on creative flow. You've got more structured creative processes from Isaacson. You've got a lot of published research that is out there. Now, even thrilled to discover, for those of you who know the TRIZ creativity methodology, there's even a book for TRIZ for Dummies, which is out there. So I think when we have the book published in the For Dummies series about how to undertake creativity, I think we reached a nirvana of knowledge that is out there for us to exploit. But of course, a lot of this knowledge is in form and it requires human intervention. We need to read it, we need to learn it, we need to understand it in order to be able to exploit it within our businesses. And a lot of this knowledge was available to a machine online that you could invoke in order to undertake creative thinking immediately for a problem that you have in view there and then. And that's essentially what we're trying to do within CebAI. We're trying to take all of this knowledge and construct a new way of working. It's very much about fleshing out or washing through this knowledge into a set of codified forms, codifying knowledge about creativity, and combining it with existing algorithms that we've been developing in our groups over the last 10 years. Algorithms that undertake scraping to take knowledge and information out of documents, for parsing the text, for sense making, to make sense of what is written in these documents, to be able to creatively search documents and information on the internet, to understand the broader information landscape about where there may be over-reporting or under-reporting of opportunities, and even algorithms that are like creative recommendation tools that are auto-ideating content and ideas for you to work with. And if we take that knowledge and all of those algorithms and put them into a series of standalone interactive applications, some of which you can see examples here, we can then combine them with business client information assets. So these, as I said, might be marketing reports, they might be competitor analyses, the databases of risk resolutions that you've applied within your health and safety function. There could be anything, as long as it's written in natural language, algorithms are able to work with it. And if you have this set up, then a particular client problem comes in, or a problem within your organization, you can immediately combine the creativity knowledge that's codified with the algorithms and the assets to provide that on-demand creative guidance for your individual teams. And that, in a nutshell, is the vision that we have for CebAI. So the project is funded by Research England. We have 4 years of funding for this. We've just passed through our first 6-month gate, and everything's going very well. We're running 6 design pilots in different disciplines. And just to finish off this overview of what CebAI is and how you should say it, I'm just going to give you 3 brief examples of the sector we're working in. So one area that we're working is digital creativity support in sports coaching. We're very much focused on elite coaches. Design pilot is being developed with a Premier League football club. And within this new pilot, this is a very early version of the tool, we're combining expert coaching knowledge with automatically discoverable research articles around various sport and science topics. and different patterns that are associated with creative outcomes to generate creative guidance that a coach can use there and then to try and think about the challenges that an athlete is having around fitness, strengthening, conditioning, diet, motivation, and general well-being. So that's going to be hitting the football fields ideally around about June. The second sector we're working in is digital creativity for health and safety. It's building on some work that we've done previously. And the underlying here is to provide organizations with creativity tools that help them to resolve risks and avoid and mitigate against risks more effectively than happens at this form of creative engagement in an activity that many of us maybe don't treat as seriously as we should. And in this area, again, we're combining creative patterns, these patterns of creative ideas that exist, with perhaps in-house databases of risk resolutions that factories and organizations have developed, how they overcome health and safety risks, and interleaving these with interactive creativity techniques that people can use on their apps to think again more creatively about how to resolve health and safety functions. And one of the advantages of working in this way is that we're able to engage the entire workforce thinking about health and safety, rather than what is normally happening is left to a small team of people who have limited capacity to work in that space. And then last but not least, we're working in an area of digital creativity in business, and in particular, how we can deliver creative thinking to small and medium-sized enterprises who compose the majority, the large number of businesses in the UK. And in this area, our work is a little bit still at the wireframe stage here, but we're combining our own existing research that's taken place within our business school here at City around business models and different taxonomies of business models, and how we combine those with different creativity patterns. Again, these patterns are creative outcomes that can be codified and manipulated. And interleaving these knowledge that can be generated from them with creativity techniques, we can make these available to business owners to think creatively about the different kinds of business models they have now or might want to evolve into in a fast-moving market. So that's my time up. I have 19 seconds left according to my timer. So if you want to know more, you know where we are, you know how to say it. It's CebAI. Feel free to get in touch, and of course we can discuss later. And I'm going to take the opportunity to hand over to my colleague, Dr. Sara Jones.
Hello, I'm Sara Jones. I'm Director of the Centre for Creativity and Professional Practice at City University of London, and also Course Director for our Masters in Innovation, Creativity and Leadership. My background is in computer science, human-computer interaction, creativity, and more latterly something more kind of interdisciplinary around what we do under Michael and as part of the Centre for Creativity. So my original brief was to talk about creativity and resilience. This is quite a huge topic. And so I've had to be careful in sort of picking a pathway through all of the possible things I could say on creativity and resilience. So many sort of associations between the two concepts. There's also some kind of symbiotic relationship between them. In other words, creativity is necessary for resilience, and vice versa, I would argue. So I've chosen to focus on how creative thinking can boost resilience rather than vice versa in this short 10 minutes, and focus in particular on the context of innovation and entrepreneurship. And just noting what an important time it seems to be thinking about this with the situation we find ourselves in and the need to build back better. So I'm going to assume that everyone on the call is comfortable with the idea of creativity as being newness that's useful somehow, broadly speaking. But I will spend just a short time thinking about resilience and what that means in various contexts. So perhaps the most familiar way of thinking about resilience is around bouncing back from difficult circumstances of some kind, or in other contexts, in engineering, for example, it's about withstanding stress, somehow systems being built to withstand attack. But in research that we've done over the last few years, it's become increasingly obvious that there's also an important element of resilience, which is about bouncing forward and seizing opportunities in the way that we do as innovators and entrepreneurs. And that's the aspect that I'll focus on here. It's also important to note that resilience is a concept that's relevant to all of us as individuals. I'm sure we've all felt the need for resilience over recent months. It also applies to organisations, so thinking about how organisations can sustain themselves through challenging circumstances. And of course, to the planet as a whole. We're very familiar with the COP26, the agenda around climate change, etc., and the need to address the sustainability and the resilience of the planet as a whole. And that's actually where I want to focus most of what I'll say in the remaining time. Just briefly on personal resilience. So I've drawn here on a range of sources, including the kinds of things that we do with students on our Masters in Innovation, Creativity and Leadership in the psychology module, thinking about cognitive reframing, habits of gratitude, building social connections and so on. Also thinking about using creative problem solving to address challenging situations we might encounter, developing a sense of purpose as a way of kind of anchoring what we do when times feel challenging. Also on the idea of reflection as being core to many creative processes and core to achieving resilience in that sense. In particular, reflective journaling as being a creative way of expressing and processing our reflective thinking. So that's just some sort of examples of ways in which we might think about the relationship between creativity and resilience at the individual level. Moving on to the organisational level, what we mean by organisational resilience is the ability of an organisation to anticipate, prepare for, respond and adapt to both incremental change and sudden disruptions in order to survive and, importantly, prosper, so to survive and thrive. We, as Centre for Creativity, have worked with a range of organisations at this sort of level. The example I've got here is from the Boosting Resilience project, which was a 2-year project funded by the Arts Council England, where we worked with 27 organisations in the arts and cultural sector, helping them think creatively about their existing assets and the role of IP in helping them to make best use of their assets in order to achieve greater organisational resilience in the longer term. And we were lucky enough to work with Enrico, one of our latest speakers, on that project, and also partners at the Culture Capital Exchange and Manchester Metropolitan University. In addition, we run a creative leadership course where we work with senior leaders from a wide range of organisations, focusing more on developing their purpose and developing an appropriate climate for creativity within an organisation, which again is important for sustaining resilience in the organisational context. So that was a brief look at organisational level resilience. And then just to finish with a few examples of ways we can think about working together through creative collaboration to build global resilience. So, as Neil mentioned at the beginning, the United Nations has designated today as World Creativity and Innovation Day in order to raise awareness of the role of creativity and innovation in all aspects of human development, and have noted how mass entrepreneurship can drive progress towards the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. In other words, recognising creativity, innovation and entrepreneurship can play a role in boosting resilience of the planet as a whole. And we're lucky enough to have been involved in several initiatives based on exactly those principles. So the example I have here is from one of the Creative Spark projects we're involved in with colleagues at the Change School and the Armenian National Engineering Lab. We're working with them to train their academics advisors in the skills of enterprise thinking and creative entrepreneurship, with the aim of sort of boosting resilience of the local economy, but also through working with the British Council, the funders of the programme, directing entrepreneurship towards initiatives on climate change, social impact, digital technology, creative industries, etc. So all building support towards achieving those sustainable development goals. And I don't know whether you can see the little grey squares at the bottom of the table here. In the work that we did with colleagues in Armenia, we practiced design thinking tasks that were triggered by thinking about their chosen sustainable development goal. So that's really kind of embedded in the training processes that we've done with them. In a very similar way, we worked with colleagues in Cuba, again, building on some work that we did with Enrico. Thank you, Enrico. Facilitating Cuban colleagues from the University of Havana, and especially from their university incubator in Cuba, in learning about UK university project incubation process and development of creative industry projects, again, with that aim of building resilience in both local economy and working towards the sustainable development goals. And again, we worked with 27 seems to be our magic number. We worked again with 27 people, with teams from the University of Havana and colleagues from related industries. And the final example is in a very similar vein. We're just in the process of negotiating agreements on a new programme funded by the British Council, which is going to be looking at innovation for African universities. Again, developing skills in creative entrepreneurship through partnerships between UK and sub-Saharan African universities. Very excited. Details will be announced soon. So I'm really excited about these ways of working with, collaborating with, co-designing with partners of the Centre for Creativity in carrying this agenda forward. I want to leave with 3 questions for consideration, perhaps in the discussion. So thinking about what's next, first of all, beyond resilience. Beyond competition, how can we think creatively about shifting the balance from competition to collaboration? So seeing our potential competitors as colleagues with whom we might find complementary interests and collaborate more effectively, for example, through the principles of open innovation. Second, how can we move beyond human-centered design? So not just thinking about the people, but the planet in the creative design and entrepreneurship that we practice. And thirdly, how can we move beyond resilience? So achieving not just resilience, not just kind of maintaining the status quo, but in fact regeneration. And I can see that I've 18 seconds over, so I'm going to stop there. Thank you very much for your time. And I'm going to hand over now to Eduardo Alonso.
Hi, everybody. I am Ed Alonso. I am the director of the Artificial Intelligence Research Center at the City University of London. I'm going to do something completely different now. I'm going to try to answer the question whether or not artificial intelligence can create art. Okay, to give you some context, this is a piece of art that was in 2018 sold in Christie's, by Christie's, for this amount of money. It was a piece of art that was, you know, the humans behind it were students of artificial intelligence at a university in Paris, and they actually use an algorithm, an artificial intelligence algorithm, to produce it. Here you have in the signature, you have actually the name of the algorithm. So what they did basically is to get a lot of, you know, hundreds, thousands, even millions of pictures of real art, okay, from WikiArt, for example, and train an artificial intelligence algorithm to produce something that was similar, okay, to these pieces of art, real pieces of art. And this is what they got out of it. So the question obviously is it art really? And was actually the artificial intelligence algorithm the one creating the art and the one who can be, therefore, be called an artist? And this is what we're trying to figure out now. So obviously, what art, you know, what's art is a difficult question to answer. If we go through a textbook on the history of art, you actually can see this, obviously, Velázquez, you can see Picasso, and you can see then this, Duchamp's Fontaine. So it's not an easy question, but in order to try to answer that and to answer whether or not an artificial intelligence entity can create this kind of thing, we can focus on 2 different aspects of dimensions. The first one is going to be about the product, and the second one about authorship. So in terms of the product, we don't care about the author, okay? We don't care about the social context of how this a piece of art was created, or the historical context, or even about the process that the artist followed in order to create the piece of art. Okay, we care only about the formal aspects of it. That is, for example, about the composition, about the contrast of different colors, about how the perspective was achieved in this particular case, so about the structure of the theme, so that, you know, the combination of these different artistic elements combined give us something that is beautiful. And I hope that everybody agrees that this as a product is beautiful and is a piece of art, really. It's obviously Leonardo's Madonna Lita. So the question is that, therefore, is the product generated by an artificial intelligence agent, as the one we have seen in the first slide, piece of art, you know, according to these characteristics? Well, the way that this is discussed in artificial intelligence fora is is some kind of another Lovelace test that in more layman's terms is the duck test. So if it looks like a duck, it is probably a duck. So we are saying here, if the piece of art that we generate using artificial intelligence looks like the original ones we trained the algorithm with, then we have to admit that what has been generated artificially with these algorithms is a piece of art. Okay, this is the arguments basically. So this is not a very convincing argument in my opinion, because basically what we are doing here is to reproduce. We are reproducing, you know, the pieces of art, the real ones that we actually took and trained the algorithm with originally. We know obviously that reproduction and appropriation are, you know, accepted practices in real art. We can just have a look at, you know, Andy Warhol's Marilyn Monroe series. But even in these particular cases, there is some kind of intention of the author in this reproduction. Okay, there is a recontextualization of, for example, in this particular case, the original picture of Marilyn Monroe in such a way that, you know, Andy Warhol, what was trying to do is to promote commodification in art. And this is something obviously that is not happening here with artificial intelligence. We're just copying and pasting, basically trying to mimic real pieces of art without any intention, as far as I can see. And this actually leads to the second dimension, according to which we identify something as art, and therefore the author as an artist. That is precisely authorship. Okay. So the arguments again of artificial intelligence is saying, okay, if you cannot discriminate really between what we have produced using artificial intelligence and the original, you know, pieces of art with which we have trained algorithm, you have to admit that the whatever created it is an artist. But obviously, an artist, at least for us human beings, you know, has something behind that. You know, it's about intentions, it's about motivations, it's about the ability and the willingness to express something to an audience, to the public. So, for example, we have the typical example of, you know, Jackson Pollock with abstract expressionism. He was trying to express, I think, the tragic sense of life, if you wish, okay, with his action painting. We have, for example, other people like Judith Chicago with the dinner party that in which she tried to denounce the discrimination of women in the world arts. And then we have, you know, closer to home in London, we have Damien Hirst's tiger shark. This is a real tiger shark, okay? This is conceptual art at the end of the day. And well, I don't know really what the author in this particular case was trying to say, but if you look at the title of this particular piece, is something along the lines of the physical impossibility of dying in the mind of someone living. So from this title, you can try to figure out whether or not there is something that is expressed here, but there was an intention from the author to say something. Now, if we you know, follow this argument with regards to whether an artificial intelligence entity can be an artist, or, you know, a proper autonomous artist, in order to answer that, I'm going to use another application of artificial intelligence, this one on autonomous vehicles that is also very, very hot now. And obviously we know that artificial intelligence has been used so far in, you know, for example, in steering the wheel, in parking automatically, in braking, you know, automatically and all that. But the point is that if the autonomous vehicle is truly autonomous, then, you know, what it would look like. And it would look like as this. Okay, so a completely autonomous vehicle won't move. That's the point. Why? Because the autonomous vehicle won't actually have an incentive, for example, to to show off in front of its friends. It won't actually drive just because for the pleasure of it. It won't actually have an incentive to take its kids to the school because it won't have any kids, and so on and so forth. So as you see, a completely autonomous entity, an artificial intelligence entity, won't actually have an intention, motivation to express or to say anything, and therefore it cannot be considered as an author in itself or as an artist. So what we have seen so far is precisely that according to these two dimensions, the product and the authorship, artificial intelligence cannot create art. Okay, let's not fool ourselves. But what we can do, an artificial intelligence does, an artificial intelligence is a technique that proper artists, real artists, actually can use in order to enhance their creativity. Okay, and this is what some people, some artists, have been doing. So the same algorithms that were used in the first slide we saw at the beginning have been used by real artists in producing some kind of art. This case is, for example, Mario Kingleman's work. It's one of the most famous artificial intelligence artists. And as I said, he used exactly the same kind of algorithms that these other guys, but he used these kind of algorithms, these techniques, in order to produce some sort of art. Okay, he actually curated the process very carefully. Other people, like here in London, Anna Riddle, have been using exactly the same kind of algorithms, but using as data sets her own pictures, her own art. Okay, so it's not reproduction as such. So as you see, you can use this kind of algorithms, but as an artist, to create some kind of art. You can agree or disagree on whether this is proper. You like this art or not. This is a question of taste. Just to give you more examples very quickly about other kind of things that artists themselves have been doing using artificial intelligence, we can have a look at this video.
It's easy to get lost in Rafik Anadol's surreal installations. But dig a little deeper, and you realize his work is made up of millions of tiny pieces, and that every single little point represents a piece of data that he's fed through a neural network to show us his vision of our future.
I was always trying to speculate this idea of, can data become a pigment?
One of the things that's run through all of my practice has been a relationship with technology. I'm fascinated in how AI might actually develop the conversation around what is choreography, who has to make choreography, what are the potentials of choreography.
Portraits invites everyone to contribute, to donate a word to a collective poem.
Chaos. Unequal.
Complex.
Ascending.
The poem is generated by means of an algorithm that's trained on 20 million words of 19th century poetry. So each word that you add to it will combine with words that have been added by others and with the words of those who were writing a few centuries ago.
Oops. So as you have seen here, different artists, we have seen people doing installations. These are three very famous artists doing installations, choreography, and poetry. As Devlin is also an artist working in installations, but in this particular case, use poetry as part of it. And that's my point, really, that artificial intelligence artists can use artificial intelligence techniques in order to enhance their creativity and produce something that actually is beautiful. Just if I may, just in one, I think I have a couple of seconds left. This is the last slide. Is about something that we have developed in CebAI. In particular, is the work of a student of our master's in artificial intelligence. In this case, what we actually trained the algorithm was some poetry from a very famous romantic poet here in English. And then we trained it with that and tried to generate poetry lines that resemble the style of this particular poet. As you can see in the top of this table, you see examples of lines that were generated by the artificial intelligence algorithm. And you at the top of at the bottom of the table, you see the lines of the real lines of the real poet. And you see there on your right the marks of the the public. Some jurors were actually hired that had to tell us whether whether they thought that the first ones were produced by the human or by the artificial intelligence, and the same about the bottom table. And remarkably, 80% of the people thought that some of the lines generated by the artificial intelligence algorithm were proper lines, okay, by written by proper poets, and some of the lines produced and written by the poet were not considered as proper poetry by this audience. And for the educated audience here, as you probably have guessed already, the poet was Wordsworth. So this is it. Sorry if I have overdone it. And I'm just passing now this over to Enrico.
First of all, my name is Enrico Bonadio, and I am an academic at the City Law School, City University of London. I am specialized in intellectual property, copyright. I teach and do research in this field, and I come from a professional background because before joining academia, I used to litigate IP. I was an IP litigator. And then I moved to academia full time. So my presentation, algorithmic art and copyright, is very much complementary to Eduardo's presentation, even if I must say that I have a slightly different idea on whether artificial intelligence just enhances the creativity of humans. I do think that here the machine does create autonomously and independently. So we're going to see some examples now. For example, this is Aida, the first robot artist which had a solo exhibition in Oxford 2 years ago. 2 years ago in Oxford, and it was a pretty, well attended event where Aida could exhibit and show all these paintings made by the robot, right? By this robot. So the critics were happy, and it was a good event. And it seems that the robot here created the paintings independently. And another project I want to talk about is the next Rembrandt project. I'm going to play a short video around 4 minutes because it explains how these Dutch research, not only Dutch, but the Dutch team with some other researchers from other countries came up with a new paintings in the style of the old Dutch maestro.
One of his great achievements, one of Rembrandt's great achievements, was to portray human emotions in a much more convincing way than artists had before him, and in many ways for all time.
At ING, we believe in the power of innovation, what it can mean to people. We want to bring this innovative spirit to our sponsorship of Dutch art and culture. We knew that for this challenge, we needed to team up with experts from various fields to make this come to life.
We're using a lot of data to improve business life, but we haven't been using data that much in a way that touches the human soul. You could say that we use technology and data like Rembrandt used his paints and his brushes to create something new.
The first step was to study the works of Rembrandt in order to create an extensive database. We gathered the data from his collection of paintings from many different sources, including 3D scans and upscale images using a deep learning algorithm. Because a significant percentage of Rembrandt paintings were portraits, we analyzed the demography of the faces in these paintings, looking at factors like gender, age, and head direction. The data led us to the conclusion that the subject should be a portrait of a Caucasian male with facial hair between 30 and 40 years old, in dark clothing with a collar, wearing a hat, and facing to the right. From there, we started to extract features only with faces that were related to that specific profile.
And we had to create a whole painting from just data. And we used statistical analysis and various algorithms to extract the features that make Rembrandt Rembrandt.
We took parts of the face and we started to compare them. And then based on this, we're able to create a typical Rembrandt eye or nose or mouth or ear. After generating the features, we were focusing on the face proportions. We used an algorithm that can detect over 60 points in a painting. We were able to align the faces and to estimate the distance between the eyes, the nose, and the mouth and the ears.
A painting is not a 2D picture. It's 3D. You can see the canvas, you can see the process, and that's what makes the painting come alive. A hive map is essential to make the painting a painting.
We incorporated the height map into the painting and printed on a 3D printer that uses a special paint-based UV ink. It printed many layers, one on top of the other, which resulted in the height and texture of the final painting.
Sometimes a magical moment to see a painting for the first time, even if it's computer generated. For me, it is something special. I would have believed if I saw it in a museum that it would have been a real Rembrandt, just one I haven't seen before.
It will be interesting to see Rembrandt looking at it. He will be happy that there are people trying to understand him and trying to create something out of that. So I think he will be happy.
The next Rembrandt makes you think about where innovation can take us. What's next?
Okay, we don't know if the Dutch maestro would be happy with that because he died more than 300 years ago. But what we know is that this is a project which has brought to life this new painting in the style of Rembrandt, the Dutch maestro. So here we have a problem from a legal perspective, and especially corporate perspective. Copyright laws around the world require authorship. We need a human author. Otherwise, the final work cannot be considered copyrighted. So the legal issue here is the next Rembrandt a copyrightable artwork or not? We might doubt about this because we don't have a human author. We have the programmer, not the people that have been interviewed in the video. They have worked at the project, but we cannot really think of them as the authors, as the artists, as the creators of the final outcome. And therefore, someone doubts about whether this is copyrightable. Well, there are certain laws, such as the UK copyright law, which creates a legal fiction. Basically, the author should be considered the person who made the necessary arrangements, right? Then we need to identify who the person who made the necessary arrangement was. For example, in the case of Rembrandt, was it the data trainer? Was it the developer, the engineers, the user of the machine? But this issue of human authorship is not really new in copyright law. Is not new. It didn't just come up with the AI creativity, but with animal creativity, right? Because everybody knows this selfie, the monkey selfie. Actually, it was a macaque. Here, the case was a British photographer, later wildlife photographer, was in Indonesia taking picture, and a monkey took his camera and started taking selfies. One of these selfies went viral, and there was even a litigation in America, in California. The photographer was party to this litigation, and on the other hand, we had an animal rights organization, PETA, which was enforcing the copyright on behalf of the monkey. But the judge was not prepared to accept animal copyright. We are not ready yet for animal copyright because monkeys cannot go to courts and enforce copyright yet. Maybe in the future they might be able to do so, but not yet. So there was no copyright over this picture because of the issue of human authorship. We need a human author, right? And also there are issues of joint authorship we need to be aware of. As I said before, in the case of the next Rembrandt, who is the programmer, who is the user, but maybe altogether they might be considered as the joint authors, the joint artists, right? And therefore issues of co-ownership, co-authorship may arise. We don't have yet a case in the US, in UK, in Europe, in other jurisdictions. So we are waiting for a case, for a judge basically, to clarify if the work, the final artwork created by AI is copyrightable and who the author and copyright owner is. For now, we are still in the dark. We don't know. And let me conclude with another theory. Several academics think and believe that these artworks should be left in the public domain because they are not copyrightable. There is no originality, there is no human authors. Well, I think that the public domain issue might be too punishing towards, for this organization, these people, because, they invest money, they invest time in coming up with this creative technology. Probably a sui generis right might be more appropriate, a shorter terms of protection, for example. Let me conclude with this last slide on neural interfaces. Is the new frontier, I think. Here we have not only the machine, but also the human brain. The human brain giving input to the machine for creating something. Again, we don't know if these technologies, this collaboration between the human beings and machines might take off in the future. But if it does, of course, if it will, we will again be presented with the legal issues, whether the final output, creative output, is copyrightable, and who is the author. The human whose brain has given the input, together with probably or likely the owner of the machine, the creator of the machine. Again, we are in the dark. And so this was my last slide. I think that I used my 10 minutes. And now, Máire, over to you.
Okay, hello everyone. Yes, my name's Máire Kerrin. I'm one of the directors at the Work Psychology Group, and we're an organisational psychology sort of research-led consultancy that specialises in assessment, development and innovation. I'm also a visiting lecturer on the Masters in Innovation, Creativity and Leadership, where I teach on the psychology of creativity and innovation. I'm just going to spend a few minutes talking to you about AI and corporate assessment, and some of the work that we've been doing looking at risks and opportunities for innovation in selection and assessment in this area. So just in terms of what I want to cover, there's been a number of recent innovations in organisational assessment that I just want to sort of place the context of some of this work in AI, sort of just quickly outline some of the progress of AI in assessment and some of the work that's been in the past in this area, and also look at some of the risks and opportunities, some of which will be very familiar across other aspects and applications of AI in other contexts, and perhaps leave with a couple of summary takeaway sort of ideas for you to think about. So in terms of this area that we do a lot of work in, there has been a massive shift towards database decision making and what's been described as evidence-based HR practices. And it's not that there hasn't been evidence-based HR practices in the past, but with the accumulation of data available in organisations, there's been a much bigger drive towards using that data to better inform the sort of talent acquisition, selection, development and progression of people into our workplaces, with a particular focus on what are the knowledge, skills and behaviours that we require of our people working on our organisations in the future. And so it really has come into sort of HR practices in terms of how we can better use that data. And this also is within the context of sort of digital transformation, but it's also meant personally, from my perspective and the others that I work with, a much more significant move to multidisciplinary team working. So psychologists like myself work alongside data, behavioural and computer scientists, but also people in marketing and brand management in terms of understanding how assessment can be better used to fulfil some of the aims and objectives of organisations in having a workforce fit for the future. So this area is, an increase in automation in assessment, gamification. I'll talk a little bit about before I talk a bit more about AI. And in the context of AI, there has been enormous amounts of innovations in assessment. The methodologies, I suppose, in terms of how we look at behaviours and skills and knowledge, perhaps, hasn't changed too much in terms of how we might assess that. But how AI is helping develop some of that has been really quite interesting. So some of you may be familiar with some of the gamified assessments or game-based assessments. There's been a lot of innovation in this space. And primarily the gamified assessment uses a lot of more simulated virtual assessment, maybe using video technology and immersive technology to ask people to take part in assessments. It still feels very much like an assessment, with the use of some of the products that are out there in terms of still trying to get scores and assessments around things like knowledge, skills, and personality, for example. The game-based assessment has been very different in that it is still more about a video game, and scoring can be based much more on how you play and what the game results are. And that's been used a lot, particularly in graduate recruitment, where a lot of it's used in terms of marketing and attraction for graduates coming into a competitive marketplace. So there's been a lot of work in that area and reflections from people like myself working in assessment in terms of what's the evidence base of some of these applications in predicting who should get those jobs and who's going to be better fitted for some of those jobs in the future. In terms of AI, particularly, it has been around for quite a while in terms of assessment. And for those of you that are probably my age and older, you may remember the paper products. They're called paper products, where if you went for a job back in the 70s or 80s, I'm not that old, maybe the 80s, you might have to go to a place and sit down and take a test if the organisation required an ability test, for example. And that was very much about manual screening. Someone would take that away and manually mark how you got on with that assessment. And it was only really in the 1990s with the online products that came on board where there was an increase in terms of trying to use technology with online assessments, and that was really about simple screening. People were actually more worried about people cheating, actually getting their aunts and uncles and brothers and sisters to complete their online test than they were about the technology. And what we've seen more recently is the use of AI in terms of personalised assessments, so organisations using algorithms to produce feedback reports and information about how one has performed in those tests, whether that's for selection or development, and more recently around applications of machine learning in using algorithms in terms of looking at predictive validity and what are the types of skills and knowledge that people require in the future. So this has been used in things like adaptive testing, generation of sort of test items for psychometrics that are being delivered, and automated sort of analysis of results. There's some really interesting work going on in this area in using those algorithms that really is stretching not just psychologists like myself who have been historically perhaps involved in test development and psychometrics that we might be involved in, but certainly in using some of these algorithms. And of course, many of you will be familiar with some of the high-profile use of AI in assessment that has, gone wrong. And a lot of this has been related to the algorithms, showing bias, perhaps against women or ethnic minorities. And there's been a lot of lessons learned and reflection in both the academic and practice community in terms of how one uses these algorithms responsibly in innovations that are happening in the assessment space. And a lot of that is about upskilling and understanding HR professionals and even assessment expertise about how these algorithms should be applied in practice. So in terms of the risks and opportunities, and just before I summarise on some of these areas, a lot of the risks, I could argue, are some of the risks that we were concerned about prior to the use and application of AI. So how do we ensure that inequality isn't embedded in the assessment process, but with AI, it's how those risks around automating that inequality mitigated. We are primarily looking at predicting the past, so the knowledge, skills and behaviours that we know predicts high performance in jobs at the moment, are they still going to be what's going to predict the jobs in the future and the future capabilities that we need in our organisations? Many of you are familiar with, well, maybe not actually, you're probably all very successful and you've never been rejected by a computer, but you spend hours and hours putting your application form together and your CV and your very well scribed responses to the question, you submit it, and within a nanosecond you get a rejection because the algorithms quickly said, no, you haven't got the certain capabilities that's required. And there's been a lot of work done in managing the applicants and candidate journey through that process. Lots of ethical concerns about adverse impact of the application of these algorithms to scoring. In particular, we do a lot of work on widening participation to professions like medicine, where there's large-scale application to medical schools, and taking care and understanding what some of the adverse impact might be on applications of some of these algorithms in assessment. And the final one around overcomplication and explainable AI, I understand is very common across any application, but particularly in assessment and recruitment and selection, is being able to explain to candidates why they have been ranked a particular level in the application process and what the criteria was that was based upon. But of course, there's lots of opportunities in this space, and this is perhaps where some of the innovation is and creativity in this space is in terms of the whole person assessment. So historically, if you applied for a job, you may have to go through a series of hurdles or separate assessments, which takes a lot of time. It can be very boring and so onwards. And this notion of whole person assessment is using AI to speed up that process, to combine assessments around personality attributes or knowledge and capabilities. So it's very promising in terms of making that a different process and experience. And there is the opportunities to reduce bias and improve candidate experience. And of course, some of the efficiencies in terms of the speed, the historical going to a centre, filling in a sort of a manual form around your ability, and maybe 3 weeks later getting a response, it doesn't really speed up the recruitment and assessment process. And lots of opportunities around data sets for L&D planning and career progression. So lots of really great opportunities and innovations in this field. I think there's a number of mitigating factors that I think we've all been looking at in terms of practice and in research in this area, which I think, for me, it's about the theory and having a sort of a theory-led question to the data that we're looking at. And again, in our work that we're doing in the multidisciplinary aspects of this area is working with data scientists and so onwards to try and apply the psychological kind of theories that we understand in terms of human behavior in assessment and what affects good practice and high performance at work, so that it doesn't become sort of data fishing expedition. To summarize and to give a flavor of where some of the takeaway parts are for our work in AI and some of the areas that's been quite innovative in this area, it's been a fantastic multidisciplinary endeavor now, and I think that will only grow, which is going to stretch, I think, people in this discipline in terms of understanding how and why we can contribute to this sort of space in terms of assessment. There's lots of opportunities for candidates, organisations, and researchers. But I think for me, in terms of the work in this area, and certainly where the innovations need to continue to be developed, is around the application of best practice assessment still hold true. So, does it identify high performers and predict future outcome? Is it fair and inclusive? Is it legally defensible? Is it transparent and acceptable to candidates going through that process? And can it be sort of tweaked to be future orientated rather than just predicting performance based on past behaviour and what we know in the past? So there's some of my thoughts on AI and assessment, and I look forward to hearing some of the questions in the chat. I'm going to stop sharing now.
So, thank you, Máire. Thank you, everybody. That was a fine assortment of talks and topics on the topic of AI and creativity. We're only 5 minutes longer than we planned, so we've got about 20 minutes left for the round table. So unless the CebAI elves in the background tell me otherwise, what I'm going to do is take questions from the beginning, and there was a question from somebody who I assumed called Barry Group, but it's not Barry Group. That person is Seda, and I think Seda is happy to ask the question herself. Hello, Seda, and you should be, the elves should unmute you.
Yes, hi, sorry, I couldn't change my name and it's my corporate account, but the picture is mine. Yeah, my question to you was, I'm still really not into AI and still don't understand everything, how it works. And is this something that is a tool that increases creativity and helps you guide through the process? Or is it something that will replace our jobs and, make people just tell the answer? Like, this is the question, and it gives you the creative answer.
I mean, my view is, and others can pitch in here, I mean, certainly in the work that we do, I don't see this. I think this is about upskilling and augmenting. I think there's a lot of I mean, the discussion around art is probably but a lot of applications of AI in business are about augmenting and are really, almost as Maura's talk said, you know, extending incrementally what we've been doing for. I often think in terms of the technologies that we're developing in CebAI, it's about the technologies hypothesizing possible ideas for users to choose between. So we have a product which is around journalism, and the tool manipulates millions of pieces of news published in different sources in order to suggest news. Now, it's not dictating that angle has to be new, it's hypothesizing based on the information it's got available, and it's reasoning that this is a novel angle, or this person is an interesting person you might interview because no one's heard his or her view before. So I think it's about hypothesizing. And I think in some senses, we've been using Google this way for quite some time. I mean, I've worked with a lot of journalists, and we're trying to propose tools that replace their rather clunky use of Google. So I think it's about upskilling. That's my personal view. I don't know how any of my colleagues feel on that one. Are we going to be replacing anybody soon, including artists?
My personal opinion is that this is about enhancement, it's about creativity and how you use it. Definitely, artificial intelligence is a technique, it's a tool, okay? Obviously, it's a sophisticated tool. It's not like a brush, and in the old days, or the fresco on a wall, or something like that. It's a new tool that has been developed in this particular era. And there's a tool a technique that works well in one particular medium, that is the digital. But that's it basically. Then whether you actually create something with it that is worthwhile looking at, for example, in terms of artistic value, is entirely up to you as the artist, okay? And how skillful you are as in managing this technique, in controlling this technique, as any other kind of technique. This is the craftsmanship part of being an artist, okay? Obviously, if you are very good, for example, like Van Gogh was, using oil with impasto, you will create something beautiful. But if you give me oil and tell me to do something with impasto, probably it's going to be rubbish. Okay.
But Eduardo, if you say that it is just a tool to enhance creativity, why does Christie sell these paintings made by AI and which are signed with the algorithm?
I mean, Enrico, when Christie's actually sold this in an action was an uproar in the art world. It was just a way of actually getting some attention from Christie's. Okay, it has after that actually Mario Kindelman's the same very same year actually tried to sell artificial intelligence arts created with the same kind of technology, and it pretty much it didn't sell very well. And the next works by Obvious was the collective who actually created this particular piece of art, didn't sell at all well. So it was just marketing, basically. As we know that the art word is sorry, my name is actually
I'm stopping it while Enrico coming back.
Yeah, I have a second question. Sorry, Eduardo.
Okay.
Because, I mean, when Aida, the robot, came out 2 years ago, I posted the news on my Facebook page. A dear friend of mine, who is a street artist, a muralist, very famous, he left a comment on my post, a quite annoyed comment, saying, but they will never paint like us. They will never put the same personality, the same human touch that we put. That's just rubbish. So if it is just a tool to enhance creativity, why did my friend express his anger?
You have to ask him.
I will.
That's a great way to close that one off. Said that, I hope you've got information to take back to this mysterious Barry Group person with whom you work. So thank you very much for that. I have another question from Alwyn de Rouge. I don't know if we're going to unmute Alwyn so we can ask the question himself. Hi, Alwyn.
Hi. Yeah. It kind of connects to the discussion you just had, so I don't want to, trigger the same response. But I was actually wondering what the limitations, what the weaknesses and the strengths really are of working with AI, I guess, as a tool or as a material, and what your experiences are. Because you could also say, well, some people would also say, well, I collaborate with an AI. And then it's a bit more human-like, right? So it's less of a tool, but more like a dialogue, something like that. So I was curious what your experiences are until now, basically.
Who wants to start?
Okay, if I may, in CebAI, we actually precisely use artificial intelligence to create these kind of things. So I can tell you that there are a lot of limitations, okay? For example, this kind of technology that is what we call deep learning, and in particular generative adversarial networks, GANs, as we call them, they are data-driven, okay? So it's very good that we have a lot of data now, and we have a GPU computational power so that we can actually work on that. So it has been very instrumental for us to have this kind of technology and this kind of data at this point in time. But this also is the gift and is the curse, because it's data-driven, and we need actually to feed a lot of data, millions of data actually, for these techniques to do anything at all. Then it's not our limitations or weaknesses or strengths, I would say, Alvin, because the thing is that we have to make dozens or hundreds actually of decisions in order to train this kind of algorithms to do anything at all. Okay, it's about the collection of data, the curation of data, then how you train the algorithms in different phases, how you actually set up the hyperparameters, and we are talking about millions of hyperparameters of the architectures, and then eventually making decisions about the accuracy or the efficiency of the algorithms. So, and this is done, obviously, all these dozens or hundreds of decisions, okay, are done by, obviously, human beings, okay, not by the algorithms. They don't do anything autonomously.
Yeah, so I think you mentioned something in the chat as well, like that.
Sorry, second.
So it's really about your investment, about learning to use the tool appropriately. But Neil, what's your opinion on that with the systems that you're?
Yeah, I mean, I would say my opinions are informed increasingly by experience, and certainly with AI, there's, as you say, trying to form a dialogue with somebody to augment their creativity. I think one thing we're focused very strongly on in CebAI is this notion of creative self-belief. We have found that even when a technology can offer up what we consider to be valuable insights and ideas, there is an overall and resistance on users such as journalists and designers to take them on. And we thought long and hard about this, and there is an emerging sort of model of creative self-belief, whether people think they have sort of they believe that they should be engaged in this kind of creative work, or whether they think they have the right creative skills to take on the ideas the dialogue is generating. So I think there's something around creative self-belief when it comes to working with tools. And I think artists who choose to work technology, they're kind of at an extreme end. They're not typical of people working in HR or other kinds of sectors. So I think there's something interesting there. I've likened it to, you can take the horse to water, but you can't make it drink. I think we can develop as many technologies as we want, but unless we deal with this wider issue of how people interact with them and trust them and see them as creative agents that they can use every day to augment their creativity, I think we will reach a wall. That's my overarching insight, probably from the last 3 years.
Interesting. Nice. Yeah, thanks.
It's okay. I'm going to keep going because time is against us. I'm going to ask a question to Máire. I haven't forgotten you as well, Sarah. I'll come around to make sure everyone is at least asked one question. No one gets away scot-free. About how to balance the job deciding algorithms. How do we design them? What kinds of procedures and frameworks do we need around them to ensure that people will trust them? Something that's quite important, and there could be a real issue of trust. Certainly today, as the EU has brought out this new framework for AI trust, I suppose, and this is another of those areas.
Yeah, it's a good question, Neil, because to be honest, most people don't like doing assessments anyway for selection. So it's an issue that you can't, you're constantly at the front of your mind in selection and assessment processes. And I think whatever new assessments you bring in, there is, particularly in competitive processes. So, where people are large scale volume competitive into high stakes professions, medicine, dentistry, the areas that we work in. There's scrutiny on you know, why didn't I get that place into medical school? Why didn't I get that place into, you know, dentistry or law? And so I do feel that the capability to be able to explain the criteria upon which people have been assessed upon is still really, really important, and why that is relevant to the job that they're doing, and that the methods that has been used, the assessment, you know, matches that, and the algorithm, whether or not it's using a machine learning type thing, has been tried, tested, piloted, and validated. So again, all the good practice of, you know, we're in the middle of one at the moment in terms of piloting using, you know, natural language processing on text-based responses, and that will be a period of 12 months or so validating that approach and algorithm. So scrutiny, I think, through publication and working in collaboration with practitioners on the ground who have been shown these nice shiny objects that you know, whether it's gamification or whatever, are being sold to them. And you know, so I think it's a combination of those things in terms of getting that stakeholder buy-in from a whole range of applicants, candidates, you know, governments. I mean, our real concern is around that adverse impact and widening participation into the profession.
Okay, thank you. Interesting. Johannes has asked 2 questions in a short period of time that at least justifies him asking 1 question. Can we give the floor to Johannes, please, so that he can ask a question? Hello, Johannes.
Hi, yeah, sure. So I'm curious, I think the second question is better. I loved your points about people being very skeptical when they only see that final result. And it's something we also experience. I'm working with a bunch of data scientists and stuff, and we also mostly legal tech. And if you show legal professionals this end result, they were increasingly skeptical about whether the decision was made right and everything. And you kind of said the same thing about engaging them in that process. And I just wonder, is there anything that worked, any good strategies, interaction patterns? I don't know, anything that worked well in the tools you worked on?
Yeah, I mean, I can say in terms of the design of...
Oh, please, Máire, please.
Sorry?
No, you go.
Yeah, sorry, I was going to say in design of our tools, it's very much about engagement with people in the development of the tools and publishing it as it went along and disseminating that. And you know, there's a lot of end user involvement in the design and the understanding of any new assessment, I think. Sorry, Neil, I interrupted you.
No, it's good. I think that was valuable. I mean, from side, one thing that we encountered, we encountered a lot of resistance in journalism with providing technologies for journalists, and we found we were able to overcome some of the resistance by producing paper-based exercises that simulated how the algorithms worked. So we almost did a kind of a structured word form, and they would sort of fill it out to explore creative ideas. And once they sort of worked through it a few times in this sort of overly simplistic version of what the algorithms did, it gave them more confidence. So I think there really is an issue of black box AI. There's a big issue about explainability. It's difficult with creativity because we don't ask artists to explain their ideas. We don't ask designers to explain through some sort of traceability process, how did you come up with that idea? And yet we impose that on a machine. So there's almost a double standard in my view. But if we can expose in some way the underlying processes, then I think that can overcome the resistance. So it's less about explainability, it's more about white box AI, which is an issue with big data because it's very difficult to do. It throws us back to other forms of AI, I think. Old school AI. Yep. Okay, there's a comment from Mabina. Hello, Mabina. Do you want to say something? I'm just rattling through here. You've got an interesting experience you might share. I think you're muted, unless Mabina, you're muted. The elves have to free you from your cage of silence.
Hi everyone.
Hello.
And yeah, hi from San Francisco. Thank you so much. It was a very interesting topic. I just wanted to say I was working with a robotic company that making like huge murals, like on the walls. And we experienced like so much, like, you know, so many artists against that robot, which whatever we made on the streets of San Francisco, they came and tagged them. And they were like kind of thinking that the robot steals their job. So even in San Francisco, the hub of tech, so they couldn't, like the business couldn't stay here. They closed up because most of the artists were against them. So I think it's a repeated question. We just discussed about that, but I wanted to see like in what extent we can kind of create that culture that's just a tool, because the data coming from the artist, you know, like the robot couldn't make anything unless we give some data and some drawing or like painting from the real artist. But most of the artists were against that.
So even the human art.
Sure. Enrico, cheer us up.
Sorry, I mean, of course, robots are trained, but also human artists are trained. They go to school, to art college, and they follow a path, right? So there are exceptions, of course, artists that, you know, are talented from birth, of course. So your examples of the mural being tagged because street artists and graffiti writers were annoyed about the new competitor matches with my example of my friend leaving the comment of my Facebook.
Yeah.
Right? They are afraid of a new competitor, right? How can we make them complementary? I think that Eduardo, sorry,
to use artificial intelligence.
But that's the truth. Actually, in the future, we replace the artist. Like they don't have, like, you know, like the artist with the traditional practice kind of removing from the scene by the rise of, you know, AI and technology. So unless they, or now like with NFT and all of this, like, you know, like a new era of digitalize everything.
So if you see, for example, what they call, you can actually look Google for artificial intelligence artists, and you will see the people, the artists who have been trained in artificial intelligence technology, and they are using artificial intelligence precisely to produce, to enhance their art. Okay, and it's about being trained. For example, there are some of them, for example, Mario, the one who I have talked about, Klingemann, he actually was an artist in residence in Google, art and culture. Okay, this is what we are doing, and this is the right path, I think, is to precisely expose to the artists to this kind of new technology and to train them in how to use it. And then they can decide whether or not to use it. Okay, of course, as a choice of the artist to choose the techniques and the medium that they want to use. And why these artists, for example, in San Francisco, your friend Enrico, precisely was so, so against this art, is exactly the same as, for example, Mario Klingemann was the first one producing an article in ArtNet News when the obvious famous painting actually was sold in Christie's, saying this is rubbish. Okay, this is rubbish because there is not artists involved here. All right. It's just an automatic production of a simulation of
Okay, Enrico, quick response, because I have one more to ask people.
Very brief, but and instead a banana with a cell tape on a canvas is art. A banana attached to a canvas.
Yeah, I know that. This is precisely, institutionally, this has been considered art. This is Danto's theory, as you know.
Okay, stop. So I have one last question, Sara. As I said, everyone gets a chance to speak. So you were talking very much earlier about creativity shifting balance more towards collaboration. It will be less about competition, more about collaboration for, brings us around to UN sustainability goals, achievement, and so. Do you have views on how that might be brought to happen? Some tactics that we may explore to make us more collaborative creativity? Crowdsourcing? Is it new forms of information sharing, idea sharing? I'm just curious.
Well, I think there's a lot that we can learn from how we already make creative climates. So just putting creative climates into place more in more different situations. I think we can learn from principles of open innovation about collaboration across boundaries, both within and between organizations. I think it's very interesting to think about how we might collaborate as humans with AI. And I think there's been so much discussion about kind of art, which is obviously interesting. And I don't know, we might think, oh, that's quite a sort of harmless thing to be experimenting with application of AI, but where art leads, much else follows. And so I'm really curious to think about how we can collaborate with AI safely, how we can avoid unintended consequences once we start to kind of expand the domains we're looking at applying AI in. And I think so the hope that I would take from this discussion is the kind of thought about from Maura about the kind of risk mitigation strategies that are being put into place in that particular context, and perhaps also the comments from Johannes about how to engage humans in the design development of the AI that we might in future collaborate with, as well as our human.
Thank you. So I'm not going to invite any more discussion. We said we'd run for a certain amount of time, and that is what we will do. So let me just say thank you all very much for joining us. We're not going to wait for the World Creativity and Innovation Day to happen. We will be running these now semi-regularly through the remainder of the year from CebAI on different topics. And just to remind you of who was talking, and should you wish to follow up with them, I will leave this on the screen for a few minutes. But I just want to thank all the speakers for getting involved. I want to thank all of those of you who have spent, well, what is for most of you, the evening with us. That is also appreciated. And finally, I want to thank CebAI's Sam Steele, who's in the background, who is the chief elf here, been making all this happen. Thank you enormously for doing that, Sam. It's appreciated. So I'm going to give everyone a round of applause, because that's what I feel like doing, and you may feel like joining in or not. But thank you all.
Thank you.